My boss fired me in front of the whole office. 8 months later, I sat in his chair. My name is Dana Reeves, and I am 38 years old. 8 months ago, my boss called me into the main conference room at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday and fired me in front of 43 people. Not in his office, not privately, with HR present and paperwork ready and the particular corporate kindness of a closed door. In the conference room, the glass-walled one on the 14th floor that faced the whole open-plan floor so that even the people who hadn't been summoned could see everything through the windows if they turned their chairs. His name was Craig Feller. He had been my direct supervisor for 6 years. He stood at the head of the table with his arms crossed and told the room that the quarterly numbers were unacceptable and that accountability started at the top of each division. And then he looked directly at me and said that effective immediately, my position was being eliminated. He used the word eliminated. 43 people watched me pick up the notepad I had brought to what I thought was a strategy meeting and walk out of that conference room. The walk from the head of the table to the door was approximately 30 feet. I counted my steps later, sitting in my car in the parking garage, because counting was the only thing my brain would do. 14 steps. What Craig Feller did not know, standing at the head of that table with his arms crossed, was that 3 weeks earlier I had been approached by a private equity firm that had been quietly evaluating Feller Creative for acquisition. They had reached out to me specifically, not to Craig, not to the board, to me, because my name was on 4 of the company's 6 largest client contracts, and because one of the firm's partners had worked with me a decade earlier and remembered exactly how those contracts had been built. I had not yet responded to their inquiry. I responded that afternoon, from the parking garage, still holding my notepad. Before I take you back to the beginning, please like and subscribe if you are new here. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. Now let me take you back 6 years, to the Monday morning I walked into Feller Creative for the first time, and to the slow accumulation of everything that made that conference room moment both inevitable and, in the end, the best thing Craig Feller ever did for me. Feller Creative was a mid-sized brand strategy firm in Chicago, the kind of company that occupies a full floor of a glass tower downtown and has its name on the door in brushed aluminum letters and serves sparkling water in the conference rooms. 60 employees when I joined, clients in financial services, healthcare, and consumer goods. The work was genuinely good. I want to be fair about that. And the people doing it were mostly talented and mostly hardworking and mostly trying to do something real inside a structure that didn't always make it easy. Craig Feller had founded the company 12 years before I arrived. He was the kind of founder who is very good at starting things and considerably less good at running them once they've started, which is a common combination and not a personal failing exactly, just a mismatch between temperament and phase. He was charming in pitches, visionary in strategy sessions, and deeply uncomfortable with the operational reality of a 60-person company that needed consistent management rather than periodic inspiration. He managed this discomfort by delegating broadly and then undermining quietly. He would give someone authority over a project and then make decisions around them without telling them. He would agree to a direction in a meeting and then contradict it in a side conversation. He was never cruel directly. He was the specific kind of difficult that is harder to name than cruelty, because every individual instance was deniable, and the pattern only became visible over time. I saw the pattern by year 2. I stayed anyway because the work itself was interesting, and because I had built something real inside that company, a client services division that had grown from 3 accounts to 11 under my management, with a retention rate that was, by year 4, the strongest number on any of Craig's investor slides. That was the other thing about Craig. He was very good at presenting other people's work as evidence of his own vision. The 11 accounts became Craig Feller's client philosophy. The retention rate became Craig's relationship-driven approach. I sat in investor presentations and watched my division's numbers used to support a narrative about Craig's leadership, and I said nothing because I was building something, and I needed the runway, and because I had always believed, with the specific optimism of someone who is good at their job, that results eventually speak for themselves. Results do eventually speak for themselves. The problem is that in the short term, the person with the microphone gets to interpret what they're saying. By year 5, I was running client services for the entire company. Not officially. My title was still Senior Director, Client Strategy, which Craig had been promising to upgrade for 18 months. But functionally, operationally, I was the person the clients called. I was the person the team came to. I was the person whose name was on the contracts. Craig knew this. I think, looking back, that this is the thing he knew most clearly and was least able to sit with. He had founded the company. His name was on the door in brushed aluminum letters. And the company's most important relationships ran through someone else. The quarterly numbers that became the excuse for the conference room that Tuesday were not my numbers. They were Craig's numbers. Specifically, the numbers from 2 new business pitches he had led personally over the previous quarter, bypassing the pitch process I had built, pursuing clients he had relationships with from a decade earlier, and losing both pitches in ways that were entirely predictable to anyone who had watched him pitch recently. I had watched him pitch recently. I had not said what I observed because Craig did not receive observation as feedback. He received it as challenge. The 2 lost pitches cost the company approximately $800,000 in projected revenue. Craig presented this shortfall to the leadership team the week before the conference room Tuesday as a systemic problem with our client strategy division. He used slides I had built for a different presentation. He drew conclusions from my data that the data did not support. He assigned the gap to a failure of client relationship management. I was the head of client relationship management. I sat in that leadership meeting and watched it happen and kept my face still and said nothing. Here's what I want to ask you, because I think a lot of people have been in some version of that leadership meeting. Have you ever sat in a room and watched someone use your work to build a case against you and felt the particular cold clarity of knowing that saying anything in that moment would only make it worse? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe if you haven't yet, because what happened in the parking garage that Tuesday afternoon is where this story actually turns. I want to tell you about the private equity firm, because understanding what they were and why they had called me is the key to everything that happened next. The firm was called Meridian Capital Partners. They were based in New York, mid-sized by private equity standards, focused on acquiring and repositioning professional services companies, marketing agencies, consulting firms, brand strategy shops. They had done 4 acquisitions in the previous 3 years, all of them companies between 40 and 80 employees, all of them situations where a founder-led business had strong underlying client relationships, but structural problems at the leadership level. That description fit Feller Creative with the precision of a document written specifically about it. The partner who had reached out to me was a woman named Sasha Oren. I had worked with Sasha a decade earlier at my previous firm, where she had been a client and I had been the account lead on her company's rebrand. We had worked together for 8 months. She had a specific memory of how I handled a crisis midway through that project, a situation where the original creative direction failed a focus group badly, 3 weeks before a board presentation, and I had rebuilt the entire strategic framework in 11 days without telling the client how bad it had been until I could tell them simultaneously how it had been fixed. She had remembered that for 10 years. She had looked me up when Meridian started evaluating Feller Creative. She had found my name on 4 of Feller's 6 largest contracts and had reached out. Her email, which arrived on a Thursday morning 3 weeks before Craig's conference room Tuesday, said simply, "I'm looking at a company I think you know well. I'd like to understand your perspective on it. Can we talk?" I had not yet responded, not because I wasn't interested. I was interested, immediately, with the particular alertness of someone who has been watching a situation develop and suddenly sees the shape of where it's going. But I had wanted to think carefully before I said anything to anyone about anything, because careful thinking had always served me better than fast movement, and because I had learned from 6 years at Feller Creative that the most important decisions are the ones you make before you're forced to make them. Craig had forced the timing, which was, in retrospect, the most useful thing he had ever done for me. I sat in the parking garage on Tuesday afternoon and typed a response to Sasha's 3-week-old email. I said I had some newly available time and would be glad to talk. I said I had perspective on the company she was evaluating and that I thought she would find it useful. I pressed send. She called within the hour. The next 8 months did not look like revenge from the outside. I want to be clear about that because the word revenge implies something hot and deliberate, and what I was doing was neither. It was simply work, the kind of work I had always done, applied now to a situation that had changed. Sasha and I talked for 2 hours that first call. I told her what I knew about Feller Creative, the client relationships, the contract structures, the team capabilities, the operational gaps. I told her where the real value was and where the perceived value was, and what the difference between those 2 things was costing the company. I told her what I thought could be built if the structural problems were addressed. I did not tell her about Tuesday. Not yet. She found out on her own 2 days later, through the standard due diligence process when she called the company to schedule a management meeting and was told by Craig's assistant that I was no longer with the firm. She called me immediately. "He fired you." "Yes," I said. "The week we started formal diligence." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That's going to complicate his negotiating position considerably." I said I imagined it might. What Sasha understood and what Craig did not was that in a service business, the value is in the relationships. The relationships live with the people, not with the company. 4 of Feller Creative's 6 largest clients had my personal cell phone number. 3 of them had called me directly in the days after my firing to ask what had happened and whether I was all right. One of them, a financial services firm that represented 18% of Feller's annual revenue, had asked, very carefully, whether I was planning to start something new. I told them all honestly that I was figuring things out. Sasha's diligence process took 6 weeks. During that time, I had coffee with the financial services client. I had lunch with 2 others. I was not soliciting. I was not making promises. I was maintaining relationships that had existed for years, which is what you do with relationships that matter. Sasha presented her acquisition offer to Craig in week 7. The offer was structured around the company's client base and operational capabilities. It was a fair offer for what the company actually was, not what Craig believed it was, which was a different number and a different story. Craig rejected it. This surprised Sasha. It did not surprise me. Craig had a number in his head that was based on what he thought his company was worth, which was based on what he needed it to be worth, which was based on a decade of telling investors and clients and employees a story about the company's trajectory that had slowly diverged from the company's actual trajectory. He was not lying exactly. He had believed the story so completely that the story and the reality had become indistinguishable to him. Sasha came back with a revised offer 4 weeks later. Lower, not higher. Because in the intervening month, the financial services client had quietly informed Craig that they were considering moving their account at renewal, pending clarity on the company's strategic direction. Craig called me 2 days after receiving the revised offer. I want to describe that call because it is the strangest moment in this story, the one I think about most. He called from his cell, not the office line. He said my name when I answered, just my name, the way people say your name when they are not sure how to begin what they need to say. I waited. He said he was aware that I had been in contact with some of the firm's clients. He said he wanted to understand my intentions. His voice had a quality I had never heard in 6 years, something underneath the usual confidence that was not quite uncertainty, but was adjacent to it. I told him my intentions were exactly what they had always been, to do good work for clients I had built relationships with over years. He said he thought we might be able to find a way to make things work, that he may have acted hastily, that my position could potentially be reinstated. I told him I appreciated that, and that I had already made other plans. He asked what plans. I told him I wasn't able to share that yet, but that he would know soon. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Was it always going to end up here?" I thought about that question for a moment before answering. Not to be dramatic, but because it was a real question and it deserved a real answer. I told him I didn't think it had always been going to end up here. I told him it had ended up here because of specific decisions made over a specific period of time, and that different decisions could have produced different outcomes, but that we were where we were and the most useful thing was to move forward clearly. He said, "I should have promoted you when I said I would." "Yes," I said, "you should have." He hung up. I sat with that call for a long time afterward. Not with satisfaction, I want to be honest about that. With something more complicated. Craig Feller had not been a villain in the way stories sometimes need villains. He had been a person with specific strengths and specific blind spots, and his blind spots had cost him in ways he hadn't seen coming because his strengths had always protected him from having to see clearly. I understood that more than I wanted to. Sasha came back to Craig a 3rd time, 6 weeks later. This time the offer was structured differently. It was not an acquisition of Feller Creative as it stood. It was an acquisition of the client relationships and operational infrastructure of Feller Creative, reorganized under new leadership, with Craig offered a consulting role, not an operational one, for an 18-month transition period. Craig's attorney advised him to take it. The financial services client had by then formally notified Craig that their account would be moving at renewal. Two other clients had asked for meetings that had the texture of exit conversations. The company's Q3 numbers were going to be the worst in its history. He took it. The new entity was structured under Meridian's portfolio, with me as Chief Operating Officer, with a path to CEO within 12 months, contingent on performance targets that Sasha and I had written together, and that I was confident were achievable because I had designed them around what I already knew was possible. The announcement went to all staff on a Monday morning. Effective immediately, the company would operate under new leadership. Craig Feller was thanked for his founding vision and his 12 years of building something real. I walked into the office that Monday at 8:30. The same building, the same brushed aluminum letters, which were scheduled to be replaced with new ones in the coming weeks. The same 14th floor with the glass-walled conference room facing the open-plan floor. I walked past the conference room without stopping. I walked to the corner office, Craig's office, the one with the view of the lake, and I set down my bag and I sat in the chair behind the desk. The chair was a good chair. I had sat across from it for 6 years. It was, as it turned out, extremely comfortable. I want to tell you about the first week because it matters more than the chair. The team was uncertain in the way teams are uncertain when everything changes at once. Some of them had been there longer than I had. Some of them had watched the conference room Tuesday happen through the glass windows of the open floor. Some of them I knew had liked Craig. Others had not. None of them knew what to expect from me. I called a meeting for that first Monday afternoon, not in the glass-walled conference room, in the smaller room at the back, the one without windows to the floor, the one where people could actually think without performing thinking. I told them what I knew, which was that the company had real value and real capability, and that the problems of the past year were structural and correctable. I told them what I didn't know, which was how each of them was feeling about the transition and what their concerns were. I told them I wanted to hear those concerns directly, not through channels, and that I would make myself available for individual conversations with anyone who wanted one. Then I asked them to go back to work, because there was work to do, and the best thing for everyone's uncertainty was forward motion. 40 people went back to their desks. 2 requested individual conversations that afternoon. By the end of the week, I had spoken with everyone who had wanted to speak. By the end of the first month, the financial services client had confirmed they were staying. The 2 accounts that had been in exit conversations had both agreed to continue, pending a 60-day review. The Q3 numbers that had been the worst in company history became a documented baseline from which everything subsequent was measured as improvement. Craig's consulting role lasted 4 months of the 18 it had been offered for. He ended it himself, which I think was the right decision for him. He was not built for consulting. He was built for founding, and I hope he finds something to found that fits him better than running did. I have been in the chair for 8 months now. The brushed aluminum letters on the door say something different. The sparkling water is still in the conference rooms. The work is still genuinely good, and every Tuesday morning, when I walk past the glass-walled conference room on my way to the office, I think about 14 steps, about what it felt like to count them, about what it cost to walk them with my face still and my notepad under my arm and the parking garage waiting at the end. I think about Sasha's email sitting in my inbox for 3 weeks while I thought carefully about what to do. I think about Craig's voice on the phone asking if it was always going to end up here. It wasn't. It ended up here because of choices. His, mine, the clients who called to ask if I was all right, the team that went back to work when I asked them to. Choices made over 8 months that began in a parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon with a 3-week-old email and the particular clarity that sometimes arrives when someone has just done the most useful thing they ever did for you without meaning to. I am still careful. I still count things when I need my brain to do something manageable. I still believe that results speak for themselves, though I have added a footnote to that belief. They speak for themselves eventually, and eventually is sometimes a longer timeline than you'd choose if you were choosing. But I am in the chair, and the view of the lake is, as it turns out, extraordinary. If someone ever humiliated you publicly and handed you, without knowing it, exactly the thing you needed to build something better, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who is in a parking garage right now, counting steps, figuring out the next thing. Sometimes being fired is just being redirected by someone who didn't know they were doing you a favor. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll see you in the next one.